Get out now, before I call military police. The Pentagon is for real soldiers, not people like you pretending to have clearance you don't understand. The brutal dismissal rang through the Pentagon's marble entrance as Security Chief Michael Torres blocked the black man in civilian clothes from the military headquarters. He looked at him with pure military contempt, completely unaware he was ejecting General Marcus Washington, the four-star general whose $11.2 billion defense authority controlled every military operation and every soldier's career in the building. Let me take you back to 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon at the Pentagon, where assumptions about military service would cost someone everything, just hours before the most critical national security briefing in recent memory. General Marcus Washington had dedicated his life to defending America. At 54, he was a four-star general and chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking military officer in the United States Armed Forces. His command authority extended over every branch of the military: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Space Force, and Coast Guard. The $11.2 billion defense budget under his oversight funded everything from aircraft carriers to cyber warfare operations. But more than the numbers and ranks, Marcus believed that military service was about protecting all Americans, regardless of their background. He'd risen through the ranks over 32 years of distinguished service, from a young lieutenant fresh out of West Point to the nation's top military advisor. His leadership had guided America through 3 major conflicts, countless peacekeeping missions, and the complex security challenges of the 21st century. Today was supposed to be routine, a classified briefing on emerging threats in Eastern Europe, followed by budget discussions for next year's defense appropriations. But Marcus had decided to arrive early and make an unannounced visit to various Pentagon departments. He wanted to observe how military personnel and civilian staff interacted when they thought no senior leadership was watching. He'd changed out of his formal military dress uniform into civilian clothes, khakis, a button-down shirt, and a casual jacket. The same type of outfit he wanted when he wanted to blend in during reconnaissance missions early in his career. To anyone who didn't recognize him personally, he looked like any middle-aged professional who might have a routine appointment somewhere in the building. It was exactly the kind of informal assessment that had made him an effective leader throughout his military career. And today, it would reveal whether the Pentagon truly lived up to the military values of honor, respect, and integrity that he'd spent his life defending. The Pentagon stood like a fortress of American military might in Arlington, Virginia, its 5 sides containing 6.5 million square feet of offices, meeting rooms, and command centers. As Marcus approached the main entrance, he could see the steady flow of military personnel in uniform, civilian defense contractors, and government officials moving through the security checkpoints. The building represented more than just military headquarters. It was the symbol of America's defense capability, the place where decisions were made that affected global security and the lives of millions of service members around the world. Marcus had his military ID card and Pentagon access badge, but he deliberately chose to approach the visitor entrance rather than the VIP or staff entrances that would have expedited his entry. He wanted to experience the Pentagon the way any American citizen might experience during their first visit to the nation's military headquarters. As he approached the security checkpoint, he noticed the different treatment accorded to various visitors. Officers in uniform moved through expedited lanes. Well-dressed civilians with obvious government credentials received respectful, efficient processing. But Marcus observed that others, particularly those who didn't fit conventional expectations about who belonged in military circles, faced additional scrutiny, longer waits, and more questioning. The observation concerned him, but he reserved judgment until he could gather more information. At the main security station, Marcus presented his Pentagon access credentials to the security staff. The young sergeant, scanning IDs, looked at Marcus's civilian clothes, then at his identification, then back at Marcus with obvious skepticism. "Sir, this ID shows a General Marcus Washington, but—" The sergeant paused, clearly uncertain. "But what, Sergeant?" Marcus asked calmly. "Well, sir, generals usually arrive in uniform, or at least formal business attire, and they typically use the senior staff entrance." Marcus smiled. "I'm here for an informal assessment today. Is there a problem with my credentials?" The sergeant studied the ID again, ran it through the scanner, and waited for the system response. "No, sir, the ID is valid, but I'll need to call this in for verification." "Of course, Sergeant. Take your time." As the sergeant made his verification call, Marcus noticed Security Chief Michael Torres approaching the checkpoint. Torres was a retired Army colonel who had transitioned to civilian security work at the Pentagon. His military bearing was still evident, but his expression suggested someone who had grown comfortable with exercising authority over people he considered beneath his notice. "What's the delay here, Sergeant?" Torres asked, his voice carrying the kind of command authority that expected immediate answers. "Sir, this gentleman has a Pentagon access badge for General Washington, but he's not in uniform and—" The sergeant glanced at Marcus, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Torres looked Marcus up and down, taking in his civilian clothes and making his assessment. His expression shifted to one of skepticism mixed with irritation. "Sir," Torres addressed Marcus directly, "do you have an appointment today?" "I do," Marcus replied simply. "And what's the nature of your visit?" "Defense briefings and budget discussions." Torres's eyebrows rose. "Defense briefings are typically restricted to senior military personnel and cleared civilian officials. May I see some additional identification?" Marcus reached into his jacket and retrieved his military ID card, the one that identified him as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Torres examined it briefly, but his skepticism seemed to increase rather than decrease. "Sir, this is a very high-level military ID. Are you sure this belongs to you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus felt the familiar weight of assumptions made based on appearance rather than credentials. Assumptions that had followed him throughout his military career, from his days as a young officer through his rise to the Pentagon's highest ranks. "I'm quite sure it belongs to me," Marcus said evenly. Torres studied the ID again, then looked at Marcus with growing suspicion. "Sir, I'm going to need to verify this through additional channels. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs is a position that requires the highest security clearances and, well, let's just say it comes with certain expectations about professional presentation." "And what expectations are those?" Marcus asked. "Military bearing, appropriate attire, advanced security coordination. The chairman doesn't just walk into the Pentagon dressed like," he gestured at Marcus's casual clothes, "like a civilian contractor or someone here for a routine appointment." Marcus noticed that their conversation was drawing attention from other security personnel and visitors waiting in line. Some looked curious, others appeared uncomfortable with the increasingly tense exchange. "I see," Marcus said. "And in your professional opinion, do I look like someone who could hold the position of chairman of the Joint Chiefs?" Torres's answer came without hesitation. "Frankly, no. The chairman is a position that commands respect through presence and bearing. It's the highest military office in our armed forces. People in that position conduct themselves with a certain dignity and formality that matches the responsibilities they carry." The implication was clear. Marcus didn't match Torres's expectations of what a senior military leader should look like. "I understand your concern," Marcus replied, "but my credentials have been verified by your systems. Is there some additional protocol I need to follow?" Torres stepped closer, his voice dropping to a tone that suggested he was being generous by explaining the obvious. "Look, I don't know how you got hold of these IDs or what kind of situation we're dealing with here, but I've worked Pentagon security for 8 years. I know what generals look like, how they carry themselves, and how they arrive for meetings." He gestured toward the VIP entrance, where a group of officers in formal uniforms were being expedited through security. That's what real military leadership looks like. Not someone walking in off the street in casual clothes claiming to be the nation's top military officer. Marcus felt the sting of the implied accusation. Not only was Torres questioning his credentials, he was suggesting that Marcus was somehow impersonating a military officer, a federal crime that carried serious penalties. Security Chief Torres. He read the man's name badge. I think there may be a misunderstanding here. The only misunderstanding is whoever you are thinking you could walk into the Pentagon and claim to be someone you're obviously not. The conversation had now attracted the attention of several uniformed military personnel passing through the security area. Some slowed their pace to observe the confrontation, while others looked uncomfortable but continued moving toward their destinations. Marcus realized that he was facing a choice. He could demand to speak to Torres' supervisor, use his authority to force recognition, or continue to handle the situation with the calm professionalism that had characterized his military leadership. He chose to give Torres one more opportunity to reconsider. Security Chief Torres, I suggest you take another look at my credentials and perhaps consult with your chain of command before making any decisions you might regret. Torres' response was swift and decisive. Sir, I'm going to ask you to step aside while we sort this out, and if you can't provide satisfactory proof of identity and purpose, I'll have to ask you to leave the premises. And if I refuse to leave? Torres' hand moved toward his radio. Then we'll have a problem that involves military police and federal charges for attempting to gain unauthorized access to a classified military facility. The threat was clear. Comply with Torres' demands or face arrest for impersonating a military officer and attempting to breach Pentagon security. Marcus looked around the security area, noting the faces of military personnel and civilian staff who were witnessing this confrontation. Some looked curious about the outcome, others seemed uncomfortable with Torres' aggressive approach, but none intervened on Marcus's behalf. In that moment, Marcus realized that he was experiencing the same kind of treatment that thousands of service members, veterans, and military families faced when their appearance didn't match conventional expectations about who belonged in military settings.
Torres' patience had clearly run out. He stepped even closer to Marcus, his voice taking on the tone of someone who had dealt with what he considered troublemakers before. "Let me make this simple for you," Torres said, his words carrying the weight of institutional authority. "Get out now before I call military police. The Pentagon is for real soldiers, not people like you pretending to have clearance you don't understand." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Here, in the building that housed America's military leadership, where he had worked for years and where he held the highest military office in the nation, someone was telling him he wasn't a real soldier. "Real soldiers?" Marcus repeated quietly. "Real soldiers," Torres confirmed, clearly believing he was making an important point. "People who've earned their place in this building through years of military service, sacrifice, and dedication, not someone who walks in off the street with questionable identification and expects to be treated like a senior officer." Marcus felt the familiar anger that came with being prejudged, but he maintained his military bearing. "And what makes you think I haven't served my country?" Torres' laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Look, I've been around the military my entire adult life. I know service members when I see them. I know officers, I know enlisted personnel, and I know civilians. And I know people who don't belong in classified military facilities." He gestured at Marcus's civilian attire again. "Real generals don't show up to the Pentagon looking like they're heading to a casual business meeting. They understand the gravity of their position, the respect due to their rank, and the security protocols that protect our nation's defense operations." The implication was unmistakable. Marcus didn't look like Torres' idea of what a military leader should be, therefore he couldn't be one. And furthermore, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is a position that requires Senate confirmation, extensive background checks, and decades of distinguished military service. It's not a position held by people who— He paused, searching for the right words. "People who what?" Marcus asked.
People who don't command immediate respect through their presence and bearing, Torres finished. The chairman advises the president on military matters, represents America's military strength to the world, and commands the respect of every service member in our armed forces. That requires a certain kind of person. Marcus understood exactly what Torres was implying without saying it directly. He didn't think Marcus looked like the kind of person who could hold America's highest military office. "I see," Marcus said calmly. "And what kind of person do you think could hold that position?" Torres gestured again toward the VIP entrance where uniformed officers continued to move through expedited security. People who look and act like military leaders. People who understand military protocol, dress appropriately for their position, and carry themselves with the dignity the office requires. The circular logic was as frustrating as it was insulting. Marcus didn't look like Torres's preconception of a military leader, therefore he couldn't be one. And his attempt to access the Pentagon must be some kind of deception or mistake. "Security Chief Torres," Marcus said, his voice remaining steady despite his growing anger. "I'm going to ask you one more time to verify my credentials through your chain of command before you make a decision that will have serious consequences for your career." Torres's response was immediate and final. "Sir, I don't respond well to threats, and I don't appreciate civilians trying to intimidate Pentagon security personnel. You have 30 seconds to begin moving toward the exit, or I will call military police and have you arrested for attempting to gain unauthorized access to a classified facility." He pulled his radio from his belt and held it ready. "Your choice."
Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his personal cell phone, the same secure device he used to communicate with the White House, Pentagon leadership, and military commanders around the world. "Before you make that call," Marcus said calmly, "I'm going to make one of my own." He dialed a number that connected directly to the Pentagon's executive office, the same number used for urgent communications involving national security and military leadership. Torres watched with growing unease as Marcus's call connected. "This is General Washington. I need you to conference in Pentagon Security Command and the Secretary of Defense's office immediately. We have a code-red security incident at the main entrance." Marcus's executive assistant, Colonel Sarah Chen, responded immediately. "Yes, General. Connecting now. Are you secure?" "I'm secure, but Pentagon security protocols are failing. I need immediate clarification of command authority and identification verification procedures." Torres's face had begun to change as he listened to Marcus's conversation. The specific military terminology, the casual reference to the Secretary of Defense, and the tone of command authority were not things that could easily be faked. "General Washington," Torres tried to interrupt, but Marcus held up a hand for silence. Marcus's phone buzzed with the incoming conference call, which he immediately put on speakerphone. "Good afternoon. This is General Marcus Washington, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, calling from the Pentagon main security checkpoint. I need to report a security incident involving the failure to recognize proper military credentials and command authority." The response was immediate and unmistakable. "This is General Patricia Martinez, Pentagon Security Command. We're recording this call, General Washington. Can you describe the incident?" "I presented proper military identification and Pentagon access credentials to Security Chief Michael Torres. Despite system verification of my credentials, Chief Torres has refused to allow me access to the building and has threatened to have me arrested for impersonating a military officer." "And what was the basis for Chief Torres's refusal?" General Martinez asked. Marcus looked directly at Torres, whose face had gone pale. "Chief Torres informed me that I don't look like a real soldier and that my appearance doesn't match his expectations for someone holding the position of Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff." The silence on the phone line was deafening. Everyone within earshot of the conversation, security personnel, military officers, and civilian staff, had stopped what they were doing to listen. "General Martinez," Chief Torres's voice came through the speaker with unmistakable authority. You're suspended from duty effective immediately pending a full investigation. General Washington, do you require immediate security assistance? Not at this time, General Martinez, but I want Chief Torres escorted from the premises immediately and a complete review of security protocols initiated. Understood, General Washington. A security team is en route to your location. Within minutes, the Pentagon's main entrance was filled with senior military personnel who had been alerted to the situation. Colonel James Patterson, the Pentagon's chief of security, arrived first, followed by several other officers who recognized General Washington immediately. General Washington, Colonel Patterson snapped to attention and rendered a proper military salute. Sir, I apologize for this incident. There appears to have been a serious failure of security protocols. Marcus returned the salute and looked around at the crowd that had gathered. Military personnel throughout the security area were now standing at attention, finally recognizing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who had been challenged and insulted by their security chief. At ease, everyone, Marcus used the command voice that had guided military operations around the world. Colonel Patterson, I want a complete investigation of how Security Chief Torres was able to ignore verified military credentials and threaten a senior officer with arrest. Yes, sir. General Washington, if I may ask, why were you using the main visitor entrance instead of the senior staff entrance? He gestured toward the security checkpoint where Torres was now standing in stunned silence, watched by several other Pentagon security personnel who had responded to the incident. I was conducting an informal assessment of Pentagon security procedures, Colonel. I wanted to observe how our security staff treats individuals who don't immediately appear to match their expectations about who belongs in this building. Colonel Patterson's expression grew troubled as he understood the implications. And what did you observe, sir? I observed systematic bias in security procedures, discriminatory treatment based on appearance rather than credentials, and a fundamental failure to respect the military identification and access systems that are supposed to protect this facility. He turned to address the growing crowd of military personnel who had gathered to witness the unprecedented scene of their highest-ranking officer being publicly vindicated after being challenged by the security chief. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus announced, his voice carrying the authority of his position. What happened here today represents a failure of the values we've sworn to defend. The United States military serves all Americans, and it draws its strength from Americans of every background who choose to serve their country. He looked directly at Torres, who remained standing near the security checkpoint, under the watch of Pentagon security personnel. When we allow prejudice and assumptions to override military protocols and professional respect, we weaken not just our security procedures, but our commitment to the Constitution we've all sworn to defend.
Over the next several hours, Marcus postponed his scheduled briefings to personally oversee the investigation into Pentagon security procedures. What the investigation revealed was deeply troubling. A review of security incident reports over the past 2 years showed a clear pattern of discriminatory treatment toward military personnel and authorized visitors who didn't match conventional expectations about appearance, background, or military bearing. Service members of color, women in leadership positions, and personnel in civilian clothes had all faced additional scrutiny, longer processing times, and more frequent challenges to their credentials. Most disturbing of all, these incidents had been systematically underreported or dismissed as misunderstandings, rather than violations of military protocols and equal treatment standards. How did this pattern continue without intervention from senior leadership? Marcus asked Colonel Patterson during the investigation briefing. Sir, the incidents were often characterized as security thoroughness rather than discriminatory treatment. Individual complaints were handled at the local level without broader pattern analysis. Marcus reviewed the case files spread across the conference table. Colonel, this isn't thoroughness. This is systematic bias that undermines military discipline and violates the equal treatment standards that are fundamental to military service. He stood and looked out the window at the Pentagon courtyard, where military personnel from every branch of service worked together on the complex tasks of national defense. The military has led American society in breaking down barriers and creating opportunities based on merit rather than appearance. When our own security procedures violate those principles, we betray everything we claim to stand for. He turned back to the investigation team. I want a complete overhaul of Pentagon security protocols. Every security officer will undergo additional training on military identification procedures, equal treatment standards, and professional respect requirements. Yes, sir. What about disciplinary actions for the personnel involved? Marcus considered the question carefully. Chief Torres will face appropriate disciplinary action through military justice procedures. But this isn't just about one individual. It's about a system that allowed this behavior to continue unchallenged. He gestured toward the case files. I want exit interviews with every security officer, surveys of military personnel and authorized visitors about their experiences, and a comprehensive review of hiring and training procedures for all Pentagon security positions. Understood, sir. Timeline for implementation? Immediate implementation for the most critical changes. Full program completion within 90 days. And I want regular progress reports directly to my office. News of the Pentagon incident spread rapidly through military channels, not through official announcements, but through the informal networks that connected military personnel worldwide. Within days, Marcus began receiving communications from service members sharing their own experiences with discriminatory treatment at military facilities. The stories were remarkably consistent, personnel being questioned about their credentials despite proper identification, assumptions made about rank and position based on appearance, and systematic challenges to the authority of service members who didn't fit conventional expectations. Captain Maria Santos, a Navy officer stationed in Norfolk, wrote about being challenged by base security despite her proper uniform and identification, with guards insisting she must be a dependent or civilian contractor rather than an active-duty officer. Major James Williams, an Air Force pilot, described repeated incidents where his expertise was questioned by personnel who assumed he couldn't possess the technical knowledge required for advanced aircraft operations. Colonel Jennifer Chang, an Army engineer, detailed systematic exclusion from important briefings and decision-making processes, with supervisors explaining that certain discussions were better suited for officers with different backgrounds. Each story represented not just individual discrimination, but a pattern of institutional bias that undermined military effectiveness and violated the principles of merit-based advancement that were supposed to govern military service. Marcus realized that the Pentagon incident was not an isolated event, but a symptom of broader cultural problems within military institutions. The same prejudices and assumptions that had led Torres to challenge his credentials were affecting military personnel at every level of service. This requires more than procedural changes, Marcus told his staff during a senior leadership meeting. This requires a comprehensive examination of military culture and a renewed commitment to the values we claim to represent.
6 months after the Pentagon incident, the Military Leadership Equality Initiative had produced measurable changes throughout the armed forces. Exit interviews revealed significant improvements in service member satisfaction. Retention rates had increased among personnel from underrepresented backgrounds, and incident reports of discriminatory treatment had decreased substantially. More importantly, the changes had improved military effectiveness. Units that embraced inclusive leadership reported better problem-solving capabilities, more innovative approaches to operational challenges, and stronger cohesion among personnel from diverse backgrounds. Marcus received regular progress reports, but the most meaningful feedback came in personal communications from service members whose military experience had been transformed by the cultural changes. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Johnson, an Army logistics officer, wrote that the new protocols had eliminated the routine challenges to his authority that had previously made his job more difficult. For the first time in my military career, he wrote, I feel like my expertise is valued based on my knowledge and experience rather than questioned because of my appearance. Major Sarah Chen, a Marine Corps intelligence officer, described how the bias reporting system had enabled her to address systematic exclusion from critical briefings without fear of retaliation. The changes didn't just protect me, they protected the mission by ensuring that all available intelligence expertise was utilized. Captain David Rodriguez, a Coast Guard operations officer, reported that the leadership training had transformed his unit's effectiveness. When everyone's contributions are valued and respected, we solve problems faster and execute missions more effectively. 1 year after the security incident, Marcus made another unannounced visit to the Pentagon, again wearing civilian clothes and using the main visitor entrance. The difference was immediately apparent. Security personnel greeted all visitors with professional respect, processed credentials efficiently regardless of appearance, and provided assistance rather than challenges to anyone with proper identification. The atmosphere had shifted from one of suspicion and exclusion to one of professional service and military courtesy. Chief Warrant Officer Lisa Thompson, who had replaced Torres as head of Pentagon security, recognized Marcus immediately, despite his civilian attire, and rendered a proper greeting. General Washington, welcome to the Pentagon. How may we assist you today? Marcus returned her greeting and looked around the security area, noting the diverse mix of military personnel, civilian employees, and authorized visitors moving through the checkpoints with dignity and respect. I'm here for routine briefings, Chief Thompson. No special assistance required. Very good, sir. Have a productive day. As Marcus moved through the security checkpoint, he reflected on the changes that had occurred since his confrontation with Torres. The transformation hadn't just improved security procedures. It had reinforced the military values of honor, respect, and integrity that were supposed to guide all military operations. Later that day, Marcus learned that the Pentagon security program had become a model for military installations worldwide. The protocols developed after his incident were being implemented at bases throughout the United States and overseas, creating consistent standards for treating all military personnel with the respect due to their service. 2 years after the Pentagon incident, Marcus was invited to speak at the graduation ceremony for the latest class of military officers from all service academies. His address focused on the lessons learned from that confrontation with Security Chief Torres. Military leadership is not just about commanding respect through rank and authority. It's about earning respect through character, competence, and commitment to the values we've sworn to defend. He looked out at the diverse group of new officers, men and women from every background, every community, and every part of America who had chosen to serve their country. You will face challenges throughout your military careers that test not just your tactical knowledge and operational skills, but your commitment to treating every service member with the dignity and respect they deserve. Remember that our strength as a military force comes not from conformity to superficial expectations, but from our ability to harness the talents and dedication of every American who chooses to serve. Marcus paused, thinking back to that day when Torres had told him he wasn't a real soldier. Real soldiers
are defined not by their appearance, their background, or whether they match someone else's preconceptions about military service. Real soldiers are defined by their willingness to defend the Constitution, protect their fellow Americans, and uphold the values that make our nation worth defending. The graduating officers stood and applauded, but Marcus knew that the real test of his message would come in the years ahead as these new leaders faced their own moments of decision about how to treat the service members under their command. 3 years after the Pentagon incident, Marcus completed his term as chairman of the Joint Chiefs and transitioned to civilian leadership roles focused on military reform and veteran advocacy. The Military Leadership Equality Initiative had become a permanent part of military culture, with regular assessments showing continued improvement in service member satisfaction, retention, and operational effectiveness. Michael Torres had been reassigned to a position outside of security operations where he underwent extensive professional development training and gradually learned to evaluate personnel based on their credentials and performance rather than their appearance. His case became a teaching example in military leadership courses about the importance of examining one's own biases and assumptions. The Pentagon security checkpoint where the original incident occurred now featured a plaque recognizing the importance of treating all military personnel and authorized visitors with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance or background. It served as a daily reminder that military effectiveness depended on recognizing and utilizing the talents of every person who chose to serve. Marcus often reflected on Torres's words, "The Pentagon is for real soldiers, not people like you." Torres had been wrong about who qualified as a real soldier, but more importantly, he had been wrong about the kind of military institution America needed to defend its values and security interests in the 21st century. The Pentagon and the military it housed belonged to all Americans who chose to serve, regardless of what they looked like, where they came from, or whether they matched someone else's preconceptions about military service. In the end, the most important battles weren't always fought on foreign battlefields. Sometimes they were fought in the marble corridors of military headquarters, where the values of honor, respect, and integrity had to be defended against the forces of prejudice, assumption, and exclusion. And sometimes the most important victories came not from defeating external enemies, but from ensuring that America's military truly reflected the diversity, strength, and values of the nation it had sworn to defend. The mission continued. If this story moved you, remember that military service belongs to everyone who answers the call to defend our nation. Every assumption challenged creates space for another American to serve with dignity, and every act of respect strengthens the force that protects our freedom. Because sometimes the most important chain of command runs not from top to bottom, but from respect to recognition, from inclusion to effectiveness, and from the values we claim to defend to the way we treat the people who defend them.